Hi, this is Brian with King Grizzly. In this video, we're going to look at a couple different ways to get buttons to sit next to each other inside of Elementor containers. If you've ever tried to put buttons next to each other in Elementor containers, you've probably discovered it can be kind of confusing. So let's figure out how to do that. When we used to use sections and columns, we could turn the buttons to an inline setting, but that doesn't seem to quite work the same in containers. So I'm going to start with nothing on the page. We'll add a container. Initially, well, I'll just drag the widget on. It actually makes a difference whether you do that or click the plus button, but I'm going to just drag it on. The first thing I'm going to do is, you don't need to do this, but I'm going to make this taller just because it makes the demo a little bit easier to follow. Okay, so then we'll just drag in some basic widgets, like we want a heading. Probably want some copy to go with that, and I would like 2 buttons. So let me just find the buttons, drag a button in here. There's one. I'm going to duplicate it. All right. So here's kind of what seems to happen by default. Also, I think I'm going to vertically center these inside that container just for the demo. Let's make it even taller. Okay, so how do we get these buttons next to each other? The first thing we can look at is the wrapper container, the parent. By default, everything's just kind of stacking. Now, if I set this to be a horizontal flow, then you'll see that everything fits on the same line. Now, if I don't want that to happen, I could choose wrap. And then items will wrap based on their width. So one approach is this. You can set the row to horizontal and set it to wrap. And then what we could do is I could click on a heading and make it 100% wide. And then the same with this one. I'm going to make it 100% wide. Now my buttons, I don't want them 100% wide. Now you see that the layout's kind of funny. So I'm going to click on the parent container and see what I can do about that. I could try to align things vertically to the center, but you see that doesn't seem to work quite right. I'm going to set some gaps too. I'll just put 24 pixels for my gaps. So I'm going to try to align the content to the center. And there you see this align content matters when I have horizontal and wrap. If I don't, it does that funny spacing, but like if it's the default, but I'll go center. So you see we're almost got it. And then what I'm going to do is justify the content to the left. So here's one way to get them in line, is to go row horizontal, wrap. I happen to center mine. The items, but then it's a little confusing because I think this is referring to themselves, how they're arranged, and then the content is referring to the overall container. But I'm going to put it at the center. And so on these 2 headings, I went to advanced, set the width to 100%, but on the buttons, I didn't change the width. They're just their normal width. And if I click on the parent, I should be able to change the gap settings. Like if I wanted more space in between those buttons, I could try, say, 48. So this would be the space, the column space. This is like horizontal space. I could make it less, 12. So that's one potential route that could work for getting things to flow. Now here, let's look at some other ones. So if I click on the parent, what if we didn't do that? What if we turn off wrap and we were flowing vertical down? We could still justify the content. I'd like to justify it vertically. The items themselves, I'd prefer them to be aligned towards the start. Now, if I turn that off, I believe I can set it individually per item. So you'll notice when I turn on align items and I hover them, they've kind of collapsed to their own size. If I turn that off, you'll notice that's not the case. They're all like 100% width. So if I were to click on my button, I could also go to advanced and change it to align to the start. And I'm going to copy that style, copy and then paste style, same thing. But it doesn't really make a difference because we've set it to flow vertically and not horizontally. So what could we do about this? So one other idea I've seen is you can drag another container in here. I'm going to just get rid of the padding. Zero out the padding. I'm going to put my buttons inside this container, if I can manage it. Okay, so now I've got a container with my buttons in it. It's a good idea to name things, so like whatever, button container for our demo. So here's kind of a nice thing. now that I have a separate container, I can just tell it, hey, just flow horizontally. And then I can adjust the gaps as I want. If I want 12 pixels of space, maybe I want it to be 24, whatever. But then I can set it to flow horizontal. I can choose whether or not I want it to wrap. On those individual buttons, then I can actually turn off the align self, which seemed to have flipped in orientation since we put it in a container that was flowing horizontally. But that would work. And you could see I could force it to go vertical. So like on tablet or mobile, if I wanted them to stack, I could just change the flow direction at some point. So those are kind of the two approaches I've seen, is a horizontal flow with a wrap, or you can keep your parent level flowing vertically. Now, just out of curiosity, if we change that to horizontal, what happens? You'll see that my child container gets put in line. If we turn on wrapping, though, we can kind of do the same thing. We can set widths on things, including this container. So by fiddling with those types of settings, hopefully you can achieve the kind of control you want over your buttons. And like I mentioned, this one actually, because these are shorter buttons, it works fine on mobile. But if I wanted to, like I said, I could just change that to a vertical. And then I could maybe even do something like stretch the items. Like this button here, I could go to content and set it to be justified. Click on that other button, justified. So you can see you can get some pretty sophisticated layouts using containers with buttons once you have a pretty good idea about how it works. And as always with these containers, you can change the gap spacing to adjust how much space is between things. And I like, when the buttons are in a container, how I could set a top margin if I wanted some extra space. So oftentimes a design looks better if the buttons got a little more space from the content above. So for example, maybe I want some breathing room between the buttons and the content above. By placing them in a container, it gives me a nice way to do that. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about putting buttons next to each other or in line using Elementor containers. If this was helpful, please consider subscribing and spreading the word about King Grizzly. Thanks.